Congressman Jim Himes, look, Congressman, you and I have very frank conversations about the status of the world and, more importantly, what's happening in our own backyard. I think people continue to underestimate the importance of the job of DNI, the Director of National Intelligence. I think that Trump has kind of poisoned the well already when he put Tulsi Gabbard in that role. And now he thinks it's funny to try to play games with the confirmation and nominations process by insisting that Bill Pulte serve in the capacity as DNI until Jay Clayton gets into that role. But let's focus on Pulte. The dude rolled up early to his job, demanded a list of people that work at the Office of National Intelligence and some other agencies, and then has started to do mass firings that you and Senator Warner warned Bill Pulte not to do. What's going on?
Yeah, Katie, let me try to bring this home for people because they hear ODNI, Office of Director of National Intelligence. Right now, 12 miles from where I'm sitting is a very big room full of people who work for something called the National Counterterrorism Center, NCTC. It's a big room with lots of desks filled by patriots who are staring at screens, watching terrorist plots try to unfold, watching cartel members try to move fentanyl and weapons around. And they are terrified right now because a guy who doesn't know what NCTC stands for, maybe doesn't even know what DNI stands for, is looking at lists upstairs. And they're thinking, am I going to have a job? And the horrifying thought is that some of them may not. And how do we feel about that? You know, Katie, you know this, but 9/11 happened because FBI wasn't talking to the CIA, wasn't talking to NGA, wasn't talking to NSA, all these three-letter agencies. So right now at ODNI, as we speak, there are people who are talking to each other at a moment in time when Iran might try to pull a fast one on us. And Bill Pulte is, I guess, because they're not telling Congress anything, running around firing people. Now, if you told me that a non-Bill Pulte leader was reforming or streamlining ODNI because they understood the organization and they spent time studying it the same way you would do if you were the CEO of Walmart or a hospital or any other organization, I would say, you go. But instead, you have a guy who has defined himself by attacking the president's political enemies, regardless of his job title, doing some very, very dangerous things that may very well put the American safety and security at risk.
Yeah, so we know what rooting out fraud, waste, and abuse looks like in the Trump administration, and how absolutely ineffective and incompetent that is. You know, Tulsi Gabbard already fired like 1,300 people already, right? So this is not already kind of a downsizing moment in these critical agencies. And I want to remind people, as DNI, Bill Pulte oversees 18 intelligence agencies. But Congressman, let's make sure everybody understands this. Pulte has zero experience in intelligence. I mean, that kind of is a general proposition too for this man, but he has zero experience in the intelligence community. How is it even vaguely possible, Congressman, that somebody who has no experience is going to be the head of 18 intelligence agencies?
Well, the frightening thing is, why Bill Pulte? And the answer, so what do we know about Bill Pulte?
Because he's a loyalist, because he's a Trump ass kisser. Yes.
Exactly my point. And he distinguished himself. Look, how many of your watchers had ever heard of FHFA, which he continues to run, the Federal Housing Finance Agency? Come on, this is a federal backwater. Really important, by the way, but he used that platform to go after Adam Schiff, to go after Letitia James, the Attorney General of New York. And President Trump took notice and he said, here's a guy who will do my political hatchet work. And the problem is FHFA is in the housing market. The intelligence community, of course, has guys with guns. The intelligence community has surveillance authorities. Not against Americans, but, you know, Bill Pulte has distinguished himself by being willing to do illegal things in the service of the president. So this is a truly terrifying appointment. You know, all I can do is say that Mark Warner and I, and hopefully, by the way, our Republican counterparts, because let's acknowledge that a bunch of Republican senators raised the alarm about Bill Pulte as well, which tells you something about the severity of it, because these are the same guys who confirmed Kash Patel at FBI and confirmed Tulsi Gabbard prior. They're raising the alarm too. Let's just hope that we can, you know, make the Bill Pulte era be a matter of hours, not a matter of weeks.
Well, as of right now, though, it would seem that Pulte would serve until at least August, right? Because this is kind of the machinations that are at play here. And this is why it's so upsetting. And this is why I wanted people to hear from you, somebody definitely in the know and somebody who's privy to information that even other members of Congress don't get to be aware about how important this job is. So Jay Clayton had a fast-tracked confirmation hearing for last week. And we'll get into him in just a second. But now Trump said, you know what? Big middle finger to all of you, including some Republicans, as you note. I'm going to have Pulte stay in this role until Clayton's replacement at the Southern District of New York in the U.S. Attorney's Office, Jamie McDonald, who's at Sullivan and Cromwell, a partner there, who's also personal lawyer for Donald Trump. Until Jamie McDonald gets into the U.S. Attorney's Office role at the SDNY, which then frees up Jay Clayton to come over and serve, I'm not even going to do anything. And so Pulte, I guess I just gave him a new name, but Pulte just gets to have this job until all of these things get moved around, all these pieces on the chessboard.
Well, look, I'm not very good at understanding what happens inside Donald Trump's brain, but I think you saw a point of leverage. Now, remember, Jay Clayton never got confirmed as
the U.S. attorney,
New York. So I think the president said, "Okay, well, now I've got a piece of leverage because the Congress, bipartisan, including Republican senators, hates Bill Pulte. So now I've got a piece of leverage. I'm going to say you don't get Jay Clayton until you confirm my guy. And oh, by the way, unless you attach the SAVE Act. Remember the SAVE Act?
That's right."
Insane election protection bill that would have the effect of disenfranchising millions of women. So anyway, he just put, this guy who has demonstrated, Donald Trump, who has demonstrated and is demonstrating in very real time that he can't make a deal in Iran, I think he saw, I've got some leverage. But the bottom line is here that his keeping Bill Pulte or putting Bill Pulte at the DNI is putting Americans at risk.
So let's talk about Jay Clayton. You and I are going to agree to disagree on the Jay Clayton nomination. I have grave concerns about Jay Clayton because I do believe, and I'll give you two critical examples, and I welcome a healthy conversation about it, Congressman. One, Jay Clayton has gone around promoting unfounded and baseless theories of election fraud being perpetrated in California, which I think is carrying a lot of the dirty water for Donald Trump. And number two, Jay Clayton has also been an apologist for a $1.8 billion slush fund that I think is tantamount to the theft of American taxpayer dollars that could fund insurrectionists, right? And would reward criminal behavior. I would agree with you that in the kind of grand scheme of comparisons of Bill Pulte to Jay Clayton, I would take a Jay Clayton over Bill Pulte any day. And yet I have to ask you, Congressman, why is it that I feel like Democrats have now been pushed to have to agree for the scraps? And you may have a different estimation of Jay Clayton, but I kind of feel like Jay Clayton also would not be the best serving person for the role of DNI.
Yeah, look, the last thing you said is exactly right. If Kamala Harris were president right now, she's not. We would have somebody of the stature of Real Haynes, who is the former DNI, who is superb. We'd have somebody appointed who was superbly qualified and around whom we would have no such qualms. But it turns out that we don't have President Harris right now. We have President Trump. So instead, we get the Star Wars cantina of absolutely hideous and unqualified and people without principle or integrity. I'm thinking of Kash Patel. I'm thinking of Howard Lutnick. I'm thinking of Tulsi Gabbard. Okay? That's the world we live in. And we have Bill Pulte, who is probably the worst. Now, I've known Jay Clayton for 40 years. Now, maybe that doesn't matter to anybody else out there, but I've known Jay Clayton for 40 years and I have watched him. And I know that fundamentally he is an educated guy. He is a guy that cares about doing the right thing. And yes, I will acknowledge that he said a bunch of things. And if you look at what he said, you could see he was hedging, he was promoting election conspiracies. No, he said a very lawyerly thing, which is that in California, the extensive period of vote counting creates opportunity for fraud. Very lawyerly. It broke my heart because I know Jay Clayton well. But the reality is that if you're going to serve in the Trump administration, you are going to bow to certain things. So if you're me and charged with oversight, and I don't get to choose, but if I'm choosing between Bill Pulte, who is a catastrophe, and Jay Clayton, who had to say a bunch of things to get the job, but who I know is fundamentally a thoughtful, smart guy, I'm choosing Jay Clayton. Again, there is some universe where I get to choose St. Francis de Assisi in this role. but I just don't happen to live in this universe. So all I'm saying is that in the real world of Trump appointments, this Star Wars cantina of horribly unqualified, terrible people, Jay Clayton's on the upper end of that.
Concur. And I think the last thing that I would note on this is the most important overarching message from this conversation is voting has consequences. And that's the reason why people need to pay attention and need to get out and vote, because without the majority, it's very hard to operate in the capacity that we're in right now. But that is also very relevant to another important topic that we have to note and touch upon today, Congressman, which is the war with Iran. I am stunned that anyone with a straight face could say that this was a beneficial deal for Americans. I don't think there is a deal. As a lawyer, I have said an agreement to agree is not an agreement. It's not a binding agreement in any capacity. Underscoring the fact, and this is what I wanted to ask you specifically. One, the nuclear weapons capabilities and enriched uranium situation with Iran is very disturbing. Right now, Iran says, psych, status quo, nobody's going to come in and do inspections. JD Vance says, nope. And Trump says, oh, inspections, everything's happening. And yet Iran, who last I checked is actually going to control this at this point, is like, nah, that's for negotiations for another day.
Yeah, look, here's the guy who, claims he knows how to make a deal. Let's take a hard look at where we really are. As we speak, tens of billions of dollars are being freed up and sent to Iran. As we speak, we have pulled our military back. As we have done all of these things. As we speak, in the White House, they're thinking about how to set up this $300 billion reconstruction fund. What have the Iranians done? Nothing. They have promised that they will reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Have they done that? No, they have not. In fact, just 2 days ago, they said we're closing it down again because of Israeli activity in Beirut. And they've said something that, if you've been negotiating for 5,000 years the way the Persians have, you might in a negotiation, which is, down the road, we might talk about our nuclear capability. That's 60 days or beyond. Here's the fact. It's hard for me not to lose my mind over this, but Carolyn Leavitt, the White House spokesperson, is celebrating that oil is at $70 a barrel. Okay. This is down from like $100 a barrel. It's still not at the $60 a barrel it was before Donald Trump started this war. JD Vance is doing little bearded victory dances over the fact that the IAEA inspectors were allowed, the Iranians say they're going to allow them in. Guess what? They
just said they're not.
They were in right up until the moment Trump decided to go to war with Iran. They are trying, and they're failing, by the way, to get back to where we were before this war started, much less to the same position that the country was in when Obama got the 2015 nuclear deal done. There was no uranium in Iran after that deal. The Trump administration they're going to be lucky if they can get back to the position that we were in before they started this war.
And let's talk about the Strait of Hormuz, reporting today stating that Iran has now created this new port authority and that they are now going to require vessels to have to obtain insurance to be able to achieve safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz, which was feasible before the illegal war of choice that Donald Trump launched back in February of this year. But now, if you're any other country that's dealing with this crap, you're like, are you kidding me? It's like the mafia. It would be very unfortunate if something happened to your vessel passing through the strait. So you should get insurance to guard against that. And we provide that insurance. I mean, Iran is getting $12 billion in released and unfrozen assets. JD Vance says you got to use it for American goods. Iran's like, here's the big middle finger for this. No, we don't. I mean, it is amazing the balance of power shift that has happened courtesy of Donald Trump. And yet JD Vance and others doing the little victory lap, like you mentioned.
Yeah, look, there's no way to put this other than to say what is very, very obvious, which is that the United States lost this war, right? Now, Donald Trump and half the Republicans around here are like, but look, we sank their Navy. They don't have any planes. They don't have any ships. That is not why you go to war. Look, we can sink anybody's Navy. The reason you go to war is for strategic reasons, to end the Nazi regime in Germany, to get independence from the British. You don't celebrate the fact that you sunk a bunch of ships, which is what they're doing. Where are we right now? The Iranian regime is tougher, younger, and more ideological than ever before. They have now learned something that they didn't know before, which is that they can survive the very worst that the United States has to throw at them. And they've learned that they can bring the United States to its knees, and the rest of the world, by the way. You think we're in a bad way with gasoline $1.50 up? Call your friends in Asia, which absolutely rely on energy. These countries, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, they're going into depressions because of what Donald Trump did. And the Iranians have learned that they have that button. That by closing the Strait of Hormuz, it doesn't matter whether they have ships or not. And so, look, there's just no other way to put it than that Donald Trump got us into a very, very expensive war, lost it, humiliated the United States, and strengthened the Iranian regime.
I got to ask you, in light of everything that is happening with Iran, in light of everything that's happening with Bill Pulte as the interim DNI, how does all of this then factor in to Section 702? Because as you and I sit here right now, we don't have an active Section 702, correct?
Yeah, it's a little unclear what's happening. And we had a long conversation about this the last time we talked. And just to remind everybody who's listening in, 702 is two things. It's a critical intelligence collection authority that keeps us safe every single day. And it's appropriately controversial, right? Because in addition to sucking in the communications of terrorists and cartel members and Chinese spies, it sometimes sucks in Americans' information. So, absolutely critical and absolutely appropriately controversial. Right now, we're not having that debate because the Bill Pulte nomination, of course, was we were this close to actually doing the right thing, reauthorizing 702 with a package of really good safeguards. And
Exactly.
Then Donald Trump dreams up Bill Pulte and kaboom. So yeah, right now it's a little unclear what's happening. But we're in a period of real uncertainty as to whether that collection is happening and therefore whether we're keeping our eye on those terrorists and cartel members who are, not doing good things for the United States.
And to be clear, Trump has also tied the SAVE Act to FISA, right? So Trump is insistent. I'll say Senate Republicans, a lot of them are actually not really public about this, but understand the need for appropriate and reasonable amendments to 702. But even they said anything that's going to have the SAVE Act attached to it, they're not going to be backing. So in theory, could it be with the expiration of 702 that this could just keep on going and the United States could still have a potential dangerous exposure?
Yeah, of course it could. Of course it could. I mean, the SAVE Act is a particularly weird brand of lunacy. As you point out, Republican senators actually have publicly told the president that they don't have the votes for it. They're not going to do
the
it.
SAVE Act. Yeah.
And it's worth, by the way, spending just 30 seconds on what the SAVE Act is, because people may have forgotten. Remember, the SAVE Act is the answer to the problem which doesn't exist, to foreigners voting in our elections, right? And
yes.
I think there's like 70 examples over 20 years of foreigners voting in our elections. But the SAVE Act is a massive piece of legislation to solve that non-problem. And the problem with the SAVE Act, apart from the fact that it's solving something that isn't a problem, is that it would require you, when you register to vote, to show your birth certificate, not a license, your birth. Now think about the many, many women out there in particular who changed their names when they got married. It happens still in this 21st century. So if you show up with a driver's license that says Smith and your birth certificate says Morehouse, you've got a huge problem. Why? Why would you risk disenfranchising millions of women in particular to solve a problem that doesn't exist? That's what the SAVE Act is.
Which kind of brings us all the way home, does it not, Congressman, to the Bill Pulte role? Because Tulsi Gabbard took on the mantle of rooting out election fraud that didn't exist. And she did that at the behest of Trump. Pulte has now decided that that has been a big I don't know. I don't really know what that man's mission is other than to give service to his dear cult leader, which then endangers election integrity, I think, because somebody who's a DNI could kind of put it all together. I mean, there are several big transparent tells across the board, but I appreciate you kind of weaving it all together for us, Congressman, because it is hard to keep track of all of it. And then there also are the kind of connecting things that there's like kind of the ligaments, right, that connect all of this together with an underarching kind of theme and a common denominator of Trump trying to wreak havoc and create this doubt about election integrity, which doesn't exist.
Yeah, look, and let me try to tie this all together. You remember the movie Spinal Tap? Here's the way I tie it together with the movie Spinal Tap. You know, Tulsi was a huge problem, right? And I knew Tulsi. I served with her in the House. I would tell you that in the crazy spectrum, Tulsi was a 6, right? She got the Puerto Rican voting machines.
Yep.
She
was
went
down in Fulton County.
Law enforcement action in Georgia. She was a 6. Bill Pulte goes to 11, right? I mean, he is much worse than, if I can use that Spinal Tap metaphor, he goes to 11 because he will not only steal voting machines, he'll go after individuals, something that Tulsi didn't do. And then again, just to take us back to Jay Clayton, I'm not nominating Jay Clayton for a Nobel Peace Prize, but I will tell you, if Tulsi's a 6, Pulte goes to 11, Jay is a 2. So let's be clear about how we stand with these 3 individuals who sit atop this $90 billion organization that is about spying and surveillance and stuff. Yeah.
It's a lot, which is why I'm grateful, which is why I'm always grateful that you do take the time to come and have these conversations. And like we said during today's conversation, right? You and I don't always agree on everything to the nth degree, but I do think the one thing that we do agree on is the safety and the security of the American people is paramount. And I do think it's something that has become a punchline in this administration, which is why I'm glad that we're keeping tabs on all of this. And look, let's see what rolls out tomorrow. Tomorrow is a totally different day, but always kind of nutty.
Tomorrow is a totally different month. Every day is a month with this administration. By the way, I got to lay on you the famous Ed Koch quote, because I use this with my constituents, to your point about agreeing. Ed Koch, when he was mayor of New York, had a thing where he would say, look, if you agree with me 40% of the time, vote against me. If you agree with me 60% of the time, vote for me. If you agree with me 100% of the time, get your head examined.
Look, amen. Look, listen, I can't even get my 11-year-old to agree with me like 10% of the time. So my persuasion skills are clearly lacking. But look, Congressman Jim Himes, thanks for coming. Anytime, you're welcome to come here and give us the latest. We appreciate you always.
Thanks a lot, Kitty.